I think that here in this samsaric matrix, as it were, so to speak, the question of history, it's very sort of a pungent fragrance pertaining to this question surrounds this issue of Jakob Böhme as a representative of Hermeticism on the question which overlaps with Strauss's attempt to reach Plato, which apparently one must understand Alexander Dugin to be involved in also with his focus on the Platonists and the Neo-Platonism. So especially this figure of Hermes Trismegistus, so the so-called thrice great Hermes. This figure is proposed originally as being the teacher of Plato, as being prior to Plato. But the whole issue of, and later on through, as Heidegger calls it, the historiology, which is a careful study of history understood as secular history, understood as a very specific form of a sequence of events. Then we get the view that no, this is a confusion. Actually, this notion was proposed later on, and it's all things that happened after Plato. It seems like to me the essence of the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, taken from the point of view of classical scholarship, is that it's very similar to the issue I've often brought up, which I take over from Strauss, which is this, and which is testified by, I think, by at least some of Dostoevsky's characters in The Possessed, by Shatov. This issue of Greek philosophy, which is then the same as Christianity, insofar as we're dealing with the good. So the good is supposed to be a way that we can know a quality of God, even though God is not directly accessible to us perhaps in another way. Agathon. So this insertion of the agathon, which is the I am that I am of the King James Bible, rather than the I shall be as I shall be of the Tyndale translation, which is to say the difference being that the one is as though we had available to us God as the good, as not sound knowledge of the good, which could come in the form of a moral example moral exemplar for example, rather than that we go more in the direction of this in Strauss's formula, as I've often repeated, the radically mysterious dispensation of fate, so that the God is not so that knowledge of the good is not directly available to us. And then, of course, that de facto in some way corresponds to the simul settlement, which is the most empowered these days, which is that knowledge, science, reason, whatever you want to call it, is the same as whatever it is that physicists, chemists, and biologists do. And then we know that physicists, chemists, and biologists, everyone would say that physicists, chemists, and biologists cannot produce real knowledge of good and evil. So connected to these problems, I think the figure of Hermes Trismegistus has to do with this synthesizing of earlier thinking with the Greek philosophy, with the good, which then becomes Christianity. So in this case with Plato, bringing in say, the books of Moses or the prophets into somehow connection with Plato, bringing in the spirit of Jerusalem, let's say, to Athens. This seems to be involved here, but so it makes a difference then whether we're talking about a secular historical timeline where all that matters is, did it really happen before, did it quote unquote really happen before, or did it really happen after? But if we are our past, and the issue of the cogency of the figure of Hermes Trismegistus is not the issue of for an empirical historical research, but it's rather an issue in a different in the dimension of let's say good and evil. So what we would discover is gold to the degree that it's really guiding for us, and it's pyrite to the degree that it's not guiding to us. The question of whether this figure actually was Plato's teacher, as was Socrates, that we could swap out in a way Socrates for, or let's say Socrates Plato, and say behind him is this spirit of the Eastern religion, or the pagan, or some kind of Old Testament God, or something like that. I think this is one of the issues that is at stake in the question of historicism. So I wanted to go into one specific example of just it's somewhat expressionistic, let's say, or just an attempt to sketch out. I don't know to what depth the example brings us, but so, for instance, but I'm tendentiously following it simply because I don't know that anyone. I mean, if I were to find out that somebody else has pushed this view other than myself, I might give it up. But since I don't know that anyone else has taken this view, I'm in some way more apt to stubbornly follow it. Is this issue of in Iliad and Homer, this view that stems from Vico, which it might not be immediately intelligible why this in a tangible way connects to the whole discussion on, say, Christianity, on science, on what knowledge is, and etc. But I believe it can be cogently shown that it does, because Homer stands, as it were, before Plato, and Plato stands before Christianity, and Christianity stands before the modern settlement on the fact-value distinction, and so forth. So these questions do come in. And so one issue is that Vico has come in, say, in the 18th century, and he said, Homer is kind of disgraceful because he's so savage, and he's always talking about war, and then he's proposed this notion that Achilles is really the hero of Iliad. And apparently he's been the one who has most tendentiously pushed this idea, which is now represented by people like, they do excellent work on the whole, for Nagy, Gregory Nagy, I think is pronounced, or properly, given us a lot of excellent material from classical scholarship. They push this view that Achilles, the Aristos, the best of the Achaeans, or the best of the Greeks, and so on, which I think is blatantly false. But but what's interesting is that it stems from this tradition going back many generations to Vico, and it's very persistent. So it seems to me it's clear that Agamemnon must be the counterpart of Zeus. Achilles is the counterpart of Ares. Therefore, Agamemnon is higher. He's the best of the Hellenes or the Greeks, or there's some confusion over which word means what here, whether the word Achaeans, for instance, refers only to a specific tribe of the Greeks, or whether it could be used to, I think it's largely held that it was also used to stand for all the Hellenes or the Greeks. But this is an instance of something we're receiving out of the past, which is still affects us in a way which maybe it's just a minor obstruction, but maybe it's a deeper obstruction. And then is what's the ground of of how is it that one can claim to see immediately, intuitively, that it's false? And what does that mean? Does that mean an immediate leap to the origin? And is the origin then the point where we're not involved in the second cave? So then this is a question of like, what are the conditions by which we can extricate ourselves from the second cave being historical consciousness? Do we actually want to do that? And is this the same thing that Heidegger's talking about in a broad way when he speaks of the new inception? So prior to the apeiron or the arche, and I think Anaximander has actually coined this word arche, as in archaeology, the beginning, origin. Is this the moment where the accrual, sort of the plaque of history, of questions we're compelled to put to ourselves, has blocked out the lucid candor of a glance which is not imposed upon by these accretions, some of which are nothing but just an insane number of points and counterpoints and arguments that create a confusion. One could say, of course, like Strauss says, the confusion in former times was put down as simply, of course, there's a great confusion among the philosophers because the problem is so difficult, because the problem of existence is so difficult, or however you want to call it. But the approach of understanding it as the problem of the second cave as history seems to afford a different avenue to these profound conundrums.